is clean language and what can you use clean language for?
Well, it needs a long answer because you can use clean language principles and practices for all sorts of things, anywhere where people are talking to each other and learning from each other and wanting to understand each other.
How can a coach use clean language to help clients or teams explore and unpack their metaphors, leading to self-discovery and building strong relationships?
I would suggest starting by asking one or two clean language questions occasionally, at a time when you wouldn't expect to ask a question. I wouldn't start by pouncing on a metaphor and asking about the metaphor necessarily. Start by getting comfortable by asking one of these two questions I'm going to say out loud now. What kind of, their word, is the first question, or is there anything else about, their word?
Feeling stuck and unable to express your best ideas? In this episode, we explore the power of clean language, a communication technique that helps individuals and teams tap into their potential by focusing on metaphors and fostering deeper understanding. We delve into how clean language can be used by coaches and teams alike to unlock self-discovery, building strong relationships, and navigating even the most challenging communication situations. Our guest today is Judy Rees, a communication expert who empowers people to achieve exceptional results through better conversations. Judy focuses on equipping professionals with next level listening, questioning, and understanding skills crucial for facilitators, coaches, leaders, and anyone navigating complex communication. As the co-author of the best-selling book, Clean Language, Revealing Metaphors and Opening Minds, Judy brings over 15 years of experience teaching this powerful approach globally. Whether you are leading a team, bridging silos, or simply wanting to unlock deeper understanding, this episode is going to be packed with insights from the true expert. So without much ado, let's get started.
Hello, Judy. Welcome to the podcast by Agile Coaching Roundtable. It's great pleasure and honor having you on our show. And thank you so much for joining us today. And before we begin, I just want to let you know that this topic is on public demand. So there are a couple of people, a few of our mentees who reached out to us. And I specifically remember one of our mentees reaching out to me, I think 2 weeks back, and she was very keen that Ramya, why don't you get this topic onto your show, clean language? And we already had our booking with you for this recording or maybe for this conversation. So I was more than happy to kind of cater to her request and others' request as well. So we are really excited to have you on our show and have a conversation with you on your book, Clean Language. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's exciting that people are curious about this stuff, because I've been talking about it for years, and it's always nice when people are actually asking for it.
Yes, yes. And yeah, I mean, like we were talking about off the recording, right? So people are aware of this topic and they use a kind of, they are curious to know more about it. And that's why we thought even we would get an opportunity to learn and maybe we can use clean language in our own coaching, maybe practices. And yes, so maybe today's podcast, what we are going to do is from the beginner's point of view, who are like very new to this concept of clean language. So to begin with, maybe for the people who are not familiar with this concept or very new to this concept, so what is clean language and what can you use clean language for?
Well, it needs a long answer because you can use clean language principles and practices for all sorts of things, anywhere where people are talking to each other and learning from each other and wanting to understand each other. One of the things that clean language is most useful for is understanding tacit knowledge, what people know but don't know that they know. I was doing a piece of work yesterday where we were actually in a factory. We wanted to understand what the factory workers knew about the particular process. And when you did a standard interview with them, they would just go, I don't know. I don't know why I do that. I've always done that. I just don't know. And by using clean language questions, we were able to find out a lot more about what they didn't think they knew. So that's what clean language is. It's not about not swearing. It's, at its simplest, a set of questions devised by the late David Grove that help people to understand what they really mean, either by what they say or what they don't say. These questions can be used with a great deal of precision, and they have some magical factors that make them particularly effective. Maybe I'll explain those in a moment, because first I want to check, did that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yes.
So clean language questions, there's a very short list of them. Depending how you count them, it's between 9 and 12 clean language questions. And you can, I've got a URL, cleanlanguagequestions.com. If you put that in, it will always redirect to a list of the questions and a little spinner that if you click the button, it spins and then it will ask you a clean language question. So that can be quite good fun. If you want to just start and have a play with them, that's where you'll find them. So the clean language questions, amongst their features, they have a space in them for the other person's words, what they just said. And you can drop those words into the question and then you find out a whole lot more about what they meant. So for example, and I'm not going to do this, but the title of this podcast has got the word agile in it. I could ask you, what kind of agile? Is that agile? A colleague, friend, Pierre Nice, did a whole research project at one time about what people meant by the word agile. He asked what kind of agile of 75 people, and he got 75 different answers. So they can be really interesting like that, because everybody means something different by any word they say. And indeed, they mean different things by their gestures, by their movements, and you can ask clean language questions about all of that.
Before we move into more of understanding what clean language is all about and trying to extract the core concept of it, maybe as a person, I would like to understand what or how does it, maybe language or what we say in conversations or in communications, right? How is it different, or what makes it to call it as a clean language, or whatever is, maybe now as a person I'm communicating, do you think it is different to what a clean language or what, the set of questions are? And maybe my question might be very simple, or maybe it might not be relevant to it, but just trying to understand it. Does it make a difference when I am a conversation or I'm having a conversation with someone? Is it needs to go through a set of you know maybe thoughtful, maybe trying to put your thought across in the right way so that you get a right extract, or maybe a right answer, or maybe trying to help out the person to make those conversation more relevant?
I think the first thing to say about that is that clean language is less about what you say and more about putting your attention on the other person and asking questions of them and finding out what they mean. Now, of course, you can ask yourself the clean questions. For example, if whoever's listening to this, ask yourself tomorrow. So that's not a clean concept. It's just a word, tomorrow. Here's a clean question. What would you like to happen? Now, everybody's answer to that question is different.
Absolutely.
But it's a clean question because it minimizes the amount of biases and judgments in the question, and it directs attention with precision, and it doesn't include my metaphors as the question asker. It leaves the space for the other person to answer. So if I'm interviewing somebody about how they do a process and we reach a certain point and I go, and what would you like to happen next? I don't need to understand the process to ask the question. That makes that question clean. If, on the other hand, I was saying things like, oh, I notice you're standing up, that must mean that the next thing you want to do is reach that from over there. That would not be a clean question because it's full of my assumptions.
Yes, absolutely. So you also did mention about metaphors, right? Would you like to talk more on that, or maybe just to simplify what exactly you are referring to when you say metaphors over here?
Yeah, so metaphors is one of those subjects I can talk about for hours, so do stop me. But the thing is that our language is made up of metaphors. That is, that we are constantly referring to one kind of thing in terms of another kind of thing. So, for example, we say things like business growth. If we're talking about business growth, we're saying the business is getting bigger. Well, it might be moving from a small office to a big office, but we also use it metaphorically. When it just does more turnover, or it has more profit, or it has more staff, but they're spread all over the world. At one level, it's true, but it's also metaphorical. And the metaphors in our language come from the fact that we think in metaphor. Metaphor is the native language of the unconscious mind. We think because we're human beings, because we are physical flesh and blood creatures, and we live in a world, we have the features we have. We have gravity. We have the ability to stand up and move around. We get sick. We get taller. All the things that happen to humans. When we think about new things that come into our world, such as Agile, we think about them in terms of physicality, of concrete reality. So in using the word Agile, we're comparing a way of working to flexibility of the body and ability to move about. We're not literally saying this software team is very bendy and very able to move. We're saying their way of working is like that. So that's what I mean by metaphor. Metaphor in this regard includes lots of little subcategories, stories, parables, metonymy, all sorts of things you learn about in school, all fit under this big umbrella of metaphor, where one kind of thing is compared to another kind of thing. Does that answer the question?
Yes. So maybe just to add to what you mentioned, of what I understood is that, isn't it when you said that this is what we do subconsciously, right? So isn't it it's our innate nature that whatever we understand, I mean, whatever we try to learn and whatever we try to understand, we try to relate it to whatever experiences that we have in our life, right? And we try to maybe relate that with our own experiences and try to present it in a simpler form so that other person can also relate to it. Am I right in maybe making the statement?
Yes, and so one of the things you'll often hear people say is that if you want to explain a complicated point, you need to come up with a metaphor to explain the thing. And whatever metaphor you use will help them in how they understand it. And that is absolutely true. If you present something with a useful metaphor, it will help people to understand. And you hear really strong metaphors that are very memorable, like the agile metaphor, and they stick, and they make things more concrete for people. What's even more interesting, though, is the fact that we use metaphors all the time without thinking about it. One of my students earlier was talking about the metaphors we use when we talk about love, for example. It's very difficult to talk about love without it being a container.
Correct.
In love, out of love. And this student actually had spent 24 hours trying to think of ways of talking about love without talking about it as a container, and had completely failed. So I opened that as a potential thing for people to play with. But you don't stop and think, oh, as I write about love to my loved one, I'm going to describe it in terms of a container. It just happens in love. And what that then has meaning, because if you fall out of love, what are the meanings of that? It means that it was somehow sudden, you fell, it was unexpected, you fell, and so on and so on. You don't even think about it, but it still has meaning. So the clean language questions were originally devised by David Grove to ask about the metaphors that people used in their language but didn't even notice they were doing.
Wow.
Because for at the time he was doing it in psychotherapy, but now we can use this same idea to uncover tacit knowledge. So uncover tacit knowledge is comparing the knowledge to something that we might, for example, take a cloth off or take
Exactly.
a lid off. We uncover it.
Wow, that's an amazing way to put. I mean, it's like the more you're talking about it, the more I'm realizing that so many metaphors we try to put in a single sentence, right? So nowadays, I mean, I can also tell you with the fact that people are using the generative AI or AI for maybe writing anything or maybe coming up with the post or coming up with the ideas. So even AI gives like so many metaphors, and we didn't even realize. We think that that's maybe part of our language, but then now when you say it, we realize that it's a metaphor, right? And we talk like we are like an open book. Open book is nothing but a metaphor that we are trying to refer to this. So it's like it is very difficult for us to even get that thing out of our conversation now. It has become so part of our body. Again, part of the body is a metaphor that we are using. So I mean, the more you are talking about it, the more we are realizing, okay, yeah, we have been used to using such metaphors, but then in childhood we were not using such metaphors. It was such a clear, crystal clear, plain, simple language. But the more vocabulary we develop and the more we interact with the different kind of people and diverse people, the more we come up with such metaphors. And also somewhere I feel that that also comes with the conscious effort of showing off the vocabulary, or maybe telling people that okay, yeah, the more the metaphor you use, the better you sound. So that is also something I think people subconsciously use metaphors for, but then it's like you have literally opened up a new perspective to what we have been doing so far. So
Ch-
maybe, yeah, yes, yeah, please.
children use metaphors just as frequently as adults. They may not look as glamorous as adult metaphors. They
Mm-hmm.
may not be as obvious, but children do this just as much as adults. It's about 6 metaphors per minute, and clean language has been used extensively with young children, not pre-verbal children, but children in kindergarten and above. You can do things like if your child has painted a picture, you can
Mm-hmm.
ask clean language questions about what's in the picture, and the children can tell you. You know, it can sometimes be quite difficult to get young kids to talk about what they've done in school, what they're drawing, all those kinds of things. Um, there, there's a fantastic book by Julie McCracken, Clean Language in the Classroom, about how she used clean language with children ages sort of 5 to 11 when she was teaching. And yeah, it can be really so there was a testimonial a student wrote one time. She said, the way I've used what I've learned in this clean language class was with my young child. On the way home from school, she started to tell me about the day, and then she said, oh, just an ordinary day. And I decided to ask her 2 or 3 clean language questions. And we had a really interesting conversation. And then, I can't remember, was it the next morning, whatever, the child said, Mummy, ask me more questions.
Wow. Nice. So it's like we
So
are
all that's
creating that
metaphor.
curiosity.
Mm. And when people get interested in what's in their own head, that's when it gets clever, because people often go about the world assuming that everybody else is the same as them, and that it's not worth asking because the other people are the same as you. So it would just be boring to ask what it's like to be them. But what the clean language questions can do is help to reveal that they are completely different to you. And when you discover that, everything becomes much more interesting. It's worth having a conversation with somebody who's different to you, because they will teach you something about life and all that there is. But you need, and then once that starts to happen, then you think, oh, well, if it wasn't just that person who is completely different to me, all the people are completely different to me. That's interesting. Let's do more of this asking.
Yes. Wow. So while you were speaking or while you were talking about maybe I was just going back to the previous conversation where you said one is an assumption. That is the thing maybe people bring in when they have a conversation, and then the other aspect of maybe I always believe is the perspective, right? And that both those two things becomes when we have those two things included. I think the conversations are not maybe helping out each other when we are trying to
Biased.
figure out something. And those two things is something which makes it much more difficult to have a conversation, right? And while you were talking about this clean language, is there or do you think there are certain guidelines or there are certain rules that we need to follow, or to have those kind of conversations? Do we need to follow certain set of certain things that we should be mindful of while taking it into consideration?
I wouldn't go as far as to say rules, because I think rules is not the right,
Right word.
isn't a
Yeah,
useful
maybe not the right word.
metaphor. So rules there suggests that to me, the metaphor is of some kind of measuring
Yeah.
device,
Yes. So
or
it binds an
perhaps,
individual. Yes.
yeah. And so for me, I wouldn't use rules. But I would say that what David Grove found was by using these particular questions, he helped people to talk about what they didn't know they knew. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One was this lack of assumptions and bias and judgment. Well, when you go in with genuine curiosity and you know the other person is not like you and you just want to find out what it is like to be them, people pick up on that. It's not a hostile, aggressive interrogation. It's a genuine curiosity and you want to know. There's also a trick within the clean language questions, which is they use the other person's words. Now, when you use the words that someone else has used, that's almost a magic trick. They will think that you see the world like them, and they will like you more. As long as you don't do it like a robot. But but any words that represent their world, and suddenly they're hearing them come back to them from you, and that builds the relationship. They think, oh yes, this is a relationship of trust. We can rely on each other. All those kinds of nice things. There's a book by Chris Voss called Never Split the Difference about it's about negotiation. He's a hostage negotiator. And he said that this idea, mirroring the other person's words, is the nearest thing that the FBI has to a Jedi mind trick.
Wow.
Now, David Grove didn't do that in order to trick people. He did it because it worked to help them talk about their inner worlds. But it does work. So all of that is encompassed in this little set of questions with the spaces for the other person's words. And then there are things that are not in those questions, but were definitely in the way David used them and the way you can use them. So an awareness of what assumptions must I be making in order even to want to ask a particular question can be really useful. And you can ask the questions about the context in which somebody exists. So all the small talk that you make, what's the weather like where you are? What were you doing just before this? What are you going to do afterwards? Where did you go? That's all about the context in which the conversation happens. If you ask any questions about that context, then you are basically getting curious about the other person in their world. And it sets up the space where you can then go on to ask your clean language questions about perhaps more deeper stuff. That might be about their tacit knowledge at work, or it might be about more personal stuff, whatever it is. They're much more likely to give you a good answer if you've set the stage by asking those kinds of questions. But here's another thing that happens when you use these questions a lot, is you become more aware of what's going on inside you. You become more aware of your own assumptions, you become more aware of your own context, and you become more aware of your own state. And when you are more aware, that means that you can do something about it. If you don't know that you're upset as you start a conversation, then you can easily be caught unawares by the fact that suddenly you feel angry or whatever it might be, which might have only minimal things to do with the person you're talking to. And actually, it's much more about what happened before you joined the call. So all of that. And of course, there's this whole thing about what could loosely be called psychogeography, the fact that we think in terms of our own stuff. So if we feel physically unwell or tired, hungry, all those things, that influences our behavior. And in the same things, hunger, tiredness, emotions, influence the other person's behavior, and it might have absolutely nothing to do with you.
Correct.
So it's that clean language has this embedded within it, this idea of you do you, I'll do me.
Wow. So, while you were talking about maybe mirroring the other person's word, right? So, I mean, a few days back, I was checking the podcast of some psychologist based out in India. So, body language expert, not the psychologist. So, the body language expert said that if you want to immediately connect with the other person, or you don't know how you want to put your body language, or how you want to present yourself, what you should be doing is, it's a simple trick. What you should be doing is mirroring the other person's gesture. So for an example, if I am doing this gesture, so if you want to get connected immediately and you don't know how to present yourself, you may also kind of copy the gesture. So she said that this is very stupid of me by saying this, but then it actually works. So that way you get connected with the other person. So you reminded me of that exact same thing when you said that we mirror other person's words so that we get connected with that person. And when you said about setting up the context, right? So I mean, this is what we try to do in our coaching context as well. I mean, when we coach our team members, be it scrum teams or agile teams, whatever we may want to call. So just an example, when we do this daily scrum, right? So we don't kind of immediately jump into action saying that, okay, get started with it. So what we may be doing is maybe try to understand, as you mentioned, their context, their environment, right? Where are you based? What are you doing? We are trying to just kind of set that stage so that the answers that we get from the other person is better. Otherwise, when we start off immediately, right? So, from this context, what I just want to understand is how can, say, from the coach's perspective, how can a coach use clean language to help clients or teams explore and unpack their metaphors, leading to self-discovery and building strong relationships?
I would suggest starting by asking one or two clean language questions occasionally, at a time when you wouldn't expect to ask a question. I wouldn't start by pouncing on a metaphor and asking about the metaphor necessarily. Start by getting comfortable by asking one of these two questions I'm going to say out loud now. What kind of, their word, is the first question, or is there anything else about, their word? And asking those when you wouldn't normally ask a question. So, for example, if you're in daily stand-up and somebody says, yesterday I just did a load of tickets and then I stopped. They want to move the thing on. They're nothing interesting to say. You could ask, what kind of tickets? You could ask, is there anything else about those tickets? And that would give you just, I mean, it might well piss off the person who wanted to just get off the call as fast as possible. That's a whole other question. But hopefully from your knowledge of the context, you'll know why they were in a hurry or why they were not saying much. So that's where I would start, is just use one or two clean language questions, what kind of, anything else about, in very ordinary conversations. Don't seek to do a whole clean language coaching thing or a complete 1 hour clean language facilitation of a whole group to start with. Start with just adding some questions. And it would even be cleaner to just add any question. Never mind a clean language question, just ask more questions. And that would be increasing the cleanness of our world. If you decide you want to ask about a metaphor, there's an important thing to say. Ask about happy stuff. Go for the good stuff is what we usually say in training. Now, that's not a for all and forever statement. It's a statement to encourage you to help boost the mood. Because here's what happens when you ask about metaphors that go downwards, that are negative. Notice this. So I was presenting at an event the other day. It was an open space. So I had a table of 10 or a dozen people sitting around. And this one lady who'd heard about clean language before, and she was saying, oh, yes, I realize that actually when somebody comes to me and starts telling me about how they're feeling down, I could ask, what kind of down? Is there anything else about that down? Whereabouts is that down? Notice what happens, because this stuff is infectious. Noticing what happens as I ask about that. And I said, what you should do is ask, you should definitely ask about the happy stuff. And I then said, and when down, ask them, what would you like to happen? And is there anything else about that you'd like to happen? Is there anything else about that? What kind of that? And what needs to happen for that thing you'd like to happen? Because that takes the energy up. Now, when you are very experienced with this stuff, of course, there are reasons you might want to find out about the problems and ask questions about that, but start by asking about the good stuff. And before I finish answering the question, I want to pick up on this whole thing about mirroring people's gestures, because David had a very strong opinion about it. The traditional neurolinguistic programming way of mirroring gestures is for you to do the same gesture as them. Potentially, for example, if they use their right hand, you use your right hand, and you do it in. So if they go like that, you go like that. You know, very, very similar. It does work, but David found there was something that worked even better. It was to a student of mine once said, let's all treat other people's imaginary friends as real. So when someone gestures in their own space around their body, acknowledge it, point to it, ask about it. Because that's important to them. Your gesture's different. And I found that both work, but I think it's interesting that there are these two ways of treating it. You can either mirror their gesture, or you can treat their imaginary friends as real.
Wow.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, before maybe we begin the conversation, and I'm just going back to it, it's like maybe when you jumped into the call, and as you started saying that you just inquired about what time it is here in India and what time it is for you. You just mentioned that maybe it's too late for you guys, and then I replied by saying that maybe I think based on what energy you have brought into the conversation, I think we can take, this conversation is going to be a more energetic one, because that is how we were able to, or at least for me, I was able to, get into that, energy which you brought into. And that is where I felt maybe that the thing that we were talking about, mirroring the same emotions, or mirroring the same gestures, or mirroring what the other person is trying to bring across, is what we should be taking cues from, and lead the conversations, right?
And states are infectious. There's no doubt about it.
Correct.
Absolutely. And while you were talking about all those things, and maybe you did, or maybe you spoke about few exercises in terms of start with small questions, maybe start with in terms of the example that you mentioned related to the daily scrum, where a person talking about taking maybe those stories or those work items, maybe try to what exactly those tickets are. Maybe that was one of the exercises that one should get started with. And the reason I'm asking is like, is there any other practices or certain exercises that one should keep practicing to enhance or to improve on this practice of doing clean language kind of conversations with everyone around?
I think one of the things that can be really helpful is get your colleagues to ask these questions. So if you can make it more of a practice, for example, in retros, that everybody asks questions, you'll have much richer conversations. And in my experience, it nearly always has to start with quite a lot of structure to force people to do something different to what they always do. The fact is, it takes effort to do something different. But I suppose as Agile coaches, it's part of our working assumption that we think that we can improve things. We think that by changing things, work will get better in all sorts of ways. But we have to accept that it's effortful to change behavior. For everybody to do something different, it's more work. So one of the ways that I like to do that with groups is literally set it up as an activity and say, right, in this retro, just for the interest of it, here are 2 questions on the wall. What kind of? Anything else about? The game is that whoever speaks, the person sitting on their left has to ask at least one of those questions.
Wow, interesting.
About whatever they say, there's going to be a question. Whatever they say, there's going to be a question. And it can produce some really interesting results, because most people, you have to get used to the fact that most people won't be expecting a question. They finish what they say, and then suddenly somebody asks them, what kind of yellow? And they look at you like you're insane for a moment. But nearly always they will answer the question, because there is a kind of yellow. There is a kind of ticket. There is a whole bunch of knowledge and assumption and context behind what they've said that it just didn't cross their mind to say.
Absolutely. And when you said about maybe doing this in the retro, definitely I'm going to try with my teams for sure. I'm going to have a few of the clean language questions and I'll ask this to do with my teams. And the point that you mentioned about for coaches to putting an effort to change someone, right? Or maybe get that change driven, right? So, I mean, when I was a team member, I was not even a coach, I was just a part of a scrum team. And in my perception, the role of a coach was to give answers and solutions to people back then, right? So, whenever I used to get stuck with something, I used to go back to my coach and I mean, agile coach of that particular project in that team. And I used to go and ask them, you know what, so and so is my problem, and can you help me with it? And the coach used to counter me with question, and I used to get so irritated at that point, saying that I mean I am seeking for an answer and solution, and on the contrary, the coach is asking me questions. But then at that point, I used to never realize that he or she is trying to help me out to find out answers by myself by asking such questions, right? And when I became a coach, that's when it clicked me that, oh, what that coach was doing is actually kind of setting me up for self discovery and maybe setting me up for internalization, right? And I was, I mean, when I got to understand this, that's when I started maybe putting up a better questions or maybe try to come up with a, and we talk about like powerful questioning, right? And now you have given a different dimension to it. Now it's like powerful questions, true, but have a clean language to it, right? Maybe ask few questions in a clean language so that it would open up a lid of maybe worms so that people can discuss about it, right? And again, I've come up with the metaphor over here. So, so it's like you are kind of throwing those simple questions, but then you are setting people up for more deeper conversations, and you're asking them to think about it, think twice about what they are saying and why they are saying, right? And to that, maybe what I would kind of want to understand is, are there any practices that anyone can do or maybe develop so that the skills of clean language gets built?
Good question. So I need to say out loud that clean language was originally a psychotherapy process, then was adapted and became a coaching process, and is now used in a whole bunch of different contexts: mediation, sales, and classrooms, all sorts of things. If you want to grab the coaching version, the one I would look for on the internet is the 5-minute coach model by Lynn Cooper and Mariette Castellino. And you can find a summary of that model very easily on the internet. There's a book, which is great, which gives a lot more detail, but you can find a one-page summary of what the model is. It's a sequence of questions, starting with, what would you like to happen? And then, what kind of? Is there anything else about? And what needs to happen for that to happen? You can see how that's taking someone's attention through a coaching process. But of course, that requires certain kinds of contexts, because if you use it in the wrong kinds of contexts, you can really annoy people. So
Correct.
what's the code for the door? If that was your original question, you do not counter that with, is there anything else about that code? Because it's just going to annoy people. There are times and places to ask questions, and there are times and places to just give them the answer. But what people, because we can only live life forwards, what we typically don't realize when we're younger and only learn later is that giving people the answer is often the wrong thing to do. And that's where the whole coaching thing comes from, that if people are effectively forced to think for themselves, they will come up with better answers than if you just told them what it was. And as managers, as a lot of people listening to this will be, as managers, we effectively infantilize the people we work with if we're constantly giving them the answers. We need to put the pressure on them to come up with stuff. A colleague I was interviewing the other week, his specialism is training people in emergency services in Tasmania.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you'd think that emergency service managers would be exactly the kind of people who need to just tell people what to do.
Correct.
It's an emergency. But it turns out that emergency service managers really need to take a coaching approach, because where they want to end up is that everybody in that emergency service thinks for themselves. They know what the overall intention is, and when things go weird on the ground, every member of the emergency service knows how to behave. They don't just go by the book. They think, right, this is the situation, that's the overall intention. Perhaps I can bend the rule that says I don't go there. Or maybe I don't. Maybe I stick with that rule and I know why I'm sticking with it. But maybe I could do this instead. And so on. So actually, emergency service managers love clean language and love coaching, because that's where they want to end up. They've got to, in their mind, we need to get a much more skilled group of people working in our services. And I think the same is true. I mean, a lot of people listening to this will be in software development. That's also a place where we need people to think for themselves. And developers have come in to software development because they are good at thinking certain kinds of things.
Correct.
What we need them to do is add to their thinking set, to think in new ways and more advanced ways, and perhaps to ask better questions. So one of the things that's great fun with clean language is teaching developers to use clean language questions to find out what the users really want, what the product owner really wants, what the big boss actually wants, never mind what he says, and what your colleagues are doing in the other team. If you can ask some clean language questions about how the other team is doing it, you might discover that they're doing it in a better way than the way you're doing it. So that fun of getting everybody to ask more questions, particularly clean language questions, it makes us all cleverer.
Yes, and again, I have a follow-up question on this, or maybe I would say is like, do you see or have you observed, certain maybe misconceptions around clean language, saying that maybe people following it or people have a different version or different understanding altogether about it, or maybe that's not exactly what the clean language is all about. Would you like to talk about that as well?
Well, one of the problems with clean language is that the phrase clean language is not unique. There are at least two other things that are meant by clean language. There's a development language called clean, and there is not swearing. Clean language is also a term in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. It just means minimizing your judgments, biases, and assumptions. David Grove took it to the next level, and it's become the term for David Grove's work. So it's a horribly confusing term, and it's not surprising people get muddled by it all. The main assumption, though, that people make when Judy's a thing about clean language, they assume that I mean clear language, that I'm all about speaking clearly. And of course, I'm all in favor of people speaking clearly. And as a former journalist, I can help people to speak clearly, but that's not what clean language is all about. Clean language is not about you speaking clearly, it's about you helping the other person to speak clearly. Does that answer the question?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so maybe we have literally come towards the end of this episode, and I did not really understand how this time has passed. I mean, you got us thinking throughout the episode. I mean, I would say this is one of such podcasts where we got our thinking hat on and we are like on our toes, like thinking, okay, this is a new perspective or this is a new thing that we are getting. So every conversation or every question that we try to ask, and literally we got something that we did not expect or we did not hear earlier on. So I really I'm going to go back to maybe check the conversation what we had. I'm definitely going to pick few things from here. So maybe for the just to for the last question, what I want to understand is if someone wants to learn the clean language or someone wants to implement the clean language, what are your advices for such people to start with? I mean, what from where they can start, or what next step that they can do so that they can incorporate this clean language in their conversation within the team members or within the management or with the clients or within their personal relationships as well.
It depends whether you like a very unstructured, self-directed approach or whether you prefer structure. If you like a very unstructured approach, go to that page, cleanlanguagequestions.com, get the spinner and just start asking some questions. Because if you ask, for example, one more clean language question every time you meet with your team, you will get a lot more information. Or you might set yourself a rule that every time you hear a certain word, you ask about it. So a student of mine has recently set herself the rule to every time she's a nurse working with people in the end of their lives. And one of the things she set herself the rule is every time someone says the word support, she's going to ask what kind of support.
What kind of support?
And she's getting loads of different answers. Or every time someone says the word agile, ask them what kind of agile. Have fun with it. If you like a more structured approach, there are a couple of things you can do. There is a course called Better Conversations, which is basically set up as 6 one-hour sessions that you could run as lunch and learns with your team or with your group of agile coaches in your organization. They're quite tightly scripted, and you can just grab those scripts and run them. 6 lunch and learns over 6 weeks. By the end of those 6 weeks, your team will be flying compared with where they are now, because they will be getting more curious about each other. They'll be having richer conversations, and they'll be building relationships with each other. So if that's the kind of structure you like, that's something that's available, and that's available free. I haven't got a link with me right now, but hopefully by the time we've got show notes, I'll be able to give you one. Another
Sure.
thing you could do, another couple of things that do have costs involved. One is, of course, the book that I co-authored, Clean Language, Revealing Metaphors and Opening Minds, available from all good bookstores. I also have online a course called Practical Clean Language. It's not very expensive. It's made up of some recorded pieces to camera, basically, but also some activities that you can do with 1 or 2 colleagues. So you can follow the course together and then do the activities. And again, you're going to get a richer sense of what this whole thing is by the end of that course. So again, I'll provide some links for that. Oh, and I do a weekly newsletter. I call it a link letter, but basically every week we do. There's typically 6 or 7 links about things to do with clean language, metaphor, a lot of agile working stuff, interesting things from the web. So if nothing else, pop to judyrees.co.uk and register to get that link letter, and you'll learn lots of stuff.
Definitely. So we asked for few things, and you gave this list of resources for our listeners and audiences. So definitely, I mean, we are going to add the links, whatever you provide. And if you want us to include anything else, please go ahead and share those things. We can add those in the description of the episode whenever we publish this. And thank you so much for doing this episode with us, Judy. We have literally learned a lot. So, at least for me, I'm going to sleep with these thoughts of whatever I have learned today, and I'm going to implement. I've already gone through or jumped onto the website like Vivek did on the clean language questions. I'm definitely going to pick those things, and I'm going to use those the technique of asking few things in the retrospectives or daily scrum. So all of that, I'm going to implement that. So you have given a new perspective to our coaching or maybe new skills to our coaching toolkit. So thank you so much for coming over and doing this podcast with us. We really, really enjoyed this conversation with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you so much for watching this episode patiently till the end. We hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll meet you again in the next episode. Till then, if you like our podcast show, then do like, share, subscribe, and let us know your feedback in the comment section. You can also listen to the episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and Audible. Thank you.